Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is FN. I'm joined again today by my sister Jane. I have seen some comments about Jane. She is my twin sister. I don't know if I mentioned that before. She has gotten the bug for making commentary videos, so she has agreed to come on board and make videos with me. I'm a retired criminal lawyer, with over 25 years of experience, so I tend to be the more logical and methodical one.
And I tend to be the more playful and sarcastic twin. We have two different personalities, and yet we complement each other so well. Sometimes it's almost like we're actually just one person when we write these scripts. But let's just keep that our little secret.
Today's video is from a channel that I've never seen anyone else cover before. He reminds me a lot of Chili. He likes to pull over at traffic stops and harass the police, inserting himself into a situation where he has no business. He also spouts the same false ideas as Chili. He has just only begun his frauditing career, having launched his channel on July 1st of 2022.
FN, why don't we just watch the video, instead of you telling people about it? We know what frauditors do. You don't need to mansplain it to your audience. Just roll the footage.
I'm not open the door. I'm not on.
Yeah. Open it. Sometimes I get so mad there's no control for me. My thoughts get so bad I might grab a bat, I don't know. My rap, my blood boils over like, oh God, here goes. I lost all feeling from my head to my toes. You said some shit that I can't let go, so just stay tuned for the rest of the show. So have you ever felt betrayed? Switching sides, see things, realize something needs change. Cause I know you got me fucked up. Let me show you what's up. Cause enough is enough. I'll take your face for a day, baby, just to make a statement. I know there's no turning back. I'm gonna try to waste it, so mad I can taste it. I know there's no turning back.
Back it up.
I'll do what it takes, I ain't making mistakes like that. I'll bleed on your face to make you go take it back. I'll lose my shit, I go crazy when I'm mad. And they go with you, shut the fuck up, you bad. And now that I'm gone, yeah, I know there's no turning back. And now that I'm gone, yeah, I know there's no turning back.
Drop the knife now.
I'ma poke a hole for you, joking's overdue. Come at me and you won't get any older, dude. Crack your holder too. Heating
Drop
up
the
inside
knife.
of me, blood so violently. Thanks for trying me. Now it's finally time to see how this
I'm
rivalry
asking
becomes a
you for your
dynasty.
supervisor.
Sir, both of my hands are right here.
Adrenaline wasted, so mad I can taste it. I know there's no turning back. I'll do what it takes, I ain't making mistakes like that. I'll bleed on your face to make you go take it back. I'll lose my shit, I go crazy when I'm mad. And they go wish you would shut the fuck up real bad. And now that I'm gone, yeah, I know there's no turning back. And now that I'm gone, yeah, I know there's no turning back.
Everything about me is fake.
Hey sir, you can film, but that's close enough right there.
10 feet's close enough.
This guy is in the state of Michigan. That particular state views the filming of police under the lens of wiretapping and eavesdropping. The state's position on filming is pretty much the same as in most states. That is, if an officer is on duty and in the normal course of business, then people can film police in a public place.
The state's primary rule is that it's legal for citizens to record a police officer doing their job in public. However, they have an exception. It comes into play when the citizen starts interfering with the officer's work. In other words, if what you're doing in any way interferes with the officer's ability to do their job or carry out their duties, that officer can order you to stop what you're doing.
That's right, Jane. If a police officer asks the person to move away from the scene, it's important they do so. The same would be true if a person recording police steps onto property that the camera person is not legally allowed to be on. No state gives the right to photograph or video the police if the camera person is breaking the trespassing laws to do so. If the police officer is on someone else's private property, then it falls within the grounds of Michigan's eavesdropping law. Of all the state's laws that I have researched thus far, Michigan appears to be unique in viewing things through the idea of wiretapping and eavesdropping. I'm actually interested in exploring this further in future videos.
Can I state the general rule on this? The state says, if you're in a public place, and you're simply recording the officer, but not making any attempt to interfere with their actions, that is pretty much fine. The two key elements that must be satisfied are non-interference and being in a public location.
That's true, Jane, but is this guy in a public place? Does the side of a highway count as a public location? I don't know. Pedestrians aren't allowed on the highway. That would probably qualify as trespassing. Is this guy interfering with the officer, performing his duties? Again, that's subjective and I'll leave it to the viewer to decide. If he is interfering, is it to a degree that could be considered more than being a nuisance? That would be an issue for a judge to decide if the officer chooses to charge him.
That's called prior restraint.
As Chili likes to say, nope. It's not. I suspect this newbie frauditor heard this term used on the internet, but he never took the time to read what it actually means. In First Amendment law, prior restraint is government action that prohibits speech or other expression before the speech happens. Prior restraint typically occurs in one of three ways. It may be a statute or regulation that requires a speaker to acquire a permit or license before speaking. Prior restraint can also be a judicial injunction that prohibits certain speech. In the third way, the government outright prohibits a certain type of speech.
Nothing that this officer is doing appears to fit into any of these types of activities. The officer appears to be illuminating a stranger walking up to his traffic stop. He's not stopping the frauditor from filming. It appears to be the officer trying to warn a potentially dangerous person to steer clear of the traffic stop. Regardless, it's not prior restraint, and it's clear that this guy doesn't understand what that even means. Why do I get the feeling that this guy isn't too bright, and this encounter isn't going to go too well?
Oh, wait, no, sir, you can film, but that's close enough. Stay right there for me, please.
10 feet's close enough.
Oh, wait, that's close enough. You can film. Stay
Don't
right
threaten
there.
me.
It sounds like the officer is aware of people's rights to film, but it also sounds like he is aware of the safety issues that would arise from this frauditor getting too close. There has been a sharp increase in officers being murdered in the past 2 years. Murders of police officers rose by 59% in 2021, amid a wider rise in violent crime across the U.S., according to FBI Director Christopher Wray.
You know, if you guys consented to that
Sir,
search, you
that's
can.
close enough right there. I already told you that, and I don't want you talking to the passengers.
I
Now
can
you're starting
say
to
whatever I
interfere with my
want. It's
traffic
called
stop.
freedom of speech.
Yes.
He may have the freedom of speech, but he doesn't have the right to interject himself into the officer's investigation. Has he crossed over that line yet? That's for the officer on the street to decide, based on the totality of the circumstances. My personal opinion is that he hasn't yet, but that the officer is doing a good job of trying to shut him down before he has a chance.
You cannot talk with them because now you're
Freedom of
interfering
speech.
with them.
No, interference
It's called
is a physical act.
So stay right there for me.
Interference is a physical
Sir,
act.
stay right there for me.
This frauditor really is a stupid guy, isn't he, FN?
Yes, Jane, yes he is. Interference doesn't need to be a physical act. A simple verbal act can qualify as interference. Many states have laws regarding obstructing a police officer without physical force, and Michigan is one of them. It is considered common knowledge that you cannot interfere with police officers while they perform their duties. The method used to interfere can be physical, verbal, or both. While there is no law against talking to police officers when they are performing their duties, you need to be careful not to say things that could escalate the situation by causing others to interfere with the police or causing others to resist. If the officer interprets your speech as interference or disorderly conduct, you could be charged with a crime.
I read an article, published by the Police Officers Association of Michigan, that says officers are worried about a thing called split attention deficit. That happens when an officer takes his or her attention away from the task at hand to worry about a person running video. When a person is forced to focus on more than one item, the amount of focus on either item suffers. In other words, they may miss something that the primary suspect is doing that could get them hurt or killed. That can be seen as obstructing the officer. Although it would be up to the officer to prove that in court, based on the totality of facts and circumstances known to the officer at the time of the event. The facts relied upon by the officer must be objective, reasonable, and measurable.
That's right, Jane. Something as simple as asking for the officer's name and badge number might not be reasonable to justify a criminal charge. But inciting the passengers in the vehicle to resist the officer's investigation might be enough. That decision would rest with the judge after the officer has articulated his reasonings, if the cop chooses to charge him.
Please do not come any closer.
You can end that search at any time, man.
We're not searching anything right now.
Car's open.
There's no weapon. Up here on work, not totally yet, so. That's close enough, sir.
This frauditor really is clueless. He clearly has no idea what is going on. The officer has stated that he's not conducting a search. I don't know about you, Jane, but if I were that cop, I'd rather have my attention focused on the passengers in the car. I wouldn't want to have to keep looking over my shoulder at the cameraman. In that split second that I take my eyes off of either one of them, my life could be in danger.
That's so true. The officer doesn't know who the cameraman is, or if he's potentially armed or dangerous. He could just be a curious citizen who enjoys filming the police, but he could also be a dangerous guy who hates cops and is just waiting for the right opportunity to kill one. That's a very risky situation for the lone officer. I can certainly understand why this cop is telling the photographer not to get too close to his traffic stop.
They threaten you guys?
Sir, I already told you, don't talk to him, stay right there.
You cannot infringe on my
And
First
you cannot
Amendment
talk
right.
to him, that's now you're starting to interfere with my traffic stop.
Interference is a physical act.
What's that?
Interference is a physical
Use
act.
it with your voice as well, because now you're interfering with it.
Interference is a physical act.
Really? Because now you're taking my attention away from them.
That sounds like the officer is warning the cameraman that he is really getting close to the line to being charged with obstruction. This officer seems to have a good understanding of the law. He knows that verbal acts can be just as serious of an interference as a physical act would be.
Well, Jane, that would be something for the cop to decide, but it does sound like he's at least warning the cameraman to film quietly and from a safe distance.
Interference is a
I
physical
already
act.
told you, that's close enough.
That's called prior restraint.
Jane, it gets me how these guys never even think about the words that they are using. They heard someone else say it, and they just repeat it. They think it sounds legal, so it must be legitimate. But if you just think about those two words, and use your brain, then you can see it actually sounds really stupid when used in this context.
I see what you're saying. If I break the two words down, prior and restraint, it makes sense why it doesn't apply here. Prior, meaning previously, or before something happens. And restraint. So you have been kept from doing something by a previous action. That doesn't make much sense in this situation.
No, it really doesn't. The officer hasn't done anything before the frauditor started filming, did he? And don't forget that this idiot thinks that interference requires a physical act. It doesn't. Michigan law is pretty clear that interference can be verbal. The only deciding factor is, if it stops or unnecessarily delays the officer from performing his duties.
And don't forget that the person in the vehicle has rights too. That person has the right to have the officer's undivided attention focused onto him so that the necessities of the stop can be completed as quickly and safely as possible. The longer that anyone is pulled over and walking around on the side of the road, the greater the risk of accidents there are.
Jane, you forget what a frauditor is. They don't care about anyone else's rights, they just want to try to provoke police, so that they can film them. To this frauditor, that person in the stopped vehicle is irrelevant. Frauditors are the biggest phonies. If he cared about defending rights, he'd let the officer do his job, so that the citizen could get on his way.
Oh, I'm not a First Amendment auditor.
What the hell does he think he is? The whole legal justification for why it is okay to film police conducting their ordinary business is the First Amendment. Is this guy for real? An auditor films to prove that they have and are willing to exercise that right. That's exactly what he's doing. Jane, this guy has some strange ideas about what is and what is not true.
An interference is a physical act, isn't that right? We both know that.
Damn, this dude is an idiot. He doesn't even try to hide his stupidity and lack of understanding.
Doesn't matter. You have no expectation of privacy in public. I'm here for your guys' safety.
This is going to be on YouTube?
Maybe.
Of course it's going to be on YouTube. This frauditor has just started out on his journey to a lengthy arrest record. He has only been a frauditor for a month, so absolutely everything he films will at first go on his channel. At least until he has built up a fair amount of content. These guys all follow a very predictable path. He'll continue to be a frauditor until his arrest record gets so long that he'll end up with a lengthy prison sentence.
They threaten you?
No, as long as you're not you're on the back seat.
Yeah, seriously, right? Hey, get back down.
Sir, stay
Don't
right
threaten
there,
me.
please.
10 feet.
10 feet, where's that rule written?
Look it up. You should know
Get
it.
up, Michigan law.
You should know it.
I have looked it up, and I can't find any Michigan law that says anything about a 10-foot rule. My best guess is that he heard about the new Arizona law and has become extremely confused. He didn't even get the distance right for the Arizona statute. So, I'm as perplexed as the officer is. There simply isn't any such Michigan law that I can find. Either way, this guy is a typical frauditor. He states things that just aren't true, but he does so with gusto. They hear a frauditor in another state say something, and then assume that all state laws are the same. They aren't. Various states have different statutes. Frauditors just parrot off the same things and assume they must be true because they heard another frauditor say it. That's just being dumb. I wish they understood how absolutely stupid they sound.
You have the right to remain silent, too.
So does the frauditor, but I think he lacks the ability. He reminds me of that guy who walks up on two people having a conversation and tries to jump in. It always comes off as unnatural and unwanted. He's so desperate to be a relevant part of the stop that I'm embarrassed for him.
It's in your interest not to answer questions. This guy's not your friend.
Thanks, man.
I'm not talking to you.
I'm talking to you. Am I allowed to do that?
Freedom of speech, isn't it?
To a point. Can't yell fire in a crowded building, can you?
Are we in a building?
What's
Am I
that?
yelling?
I didn't say that.
Clearly, this officer is using a fourth-grade explanation of the limits on free speech, but this bonehead is too dumb to realize it. It always surprises me that there are people this stupid in our society. Go forth, frauditor. You have a standing reservation at the Grey Bar Hilton in your near future. Send me a letter when you get there.
What'd they say they stopped you for? No reason, huh?
How is that any of this frauditor's business? He's so desperate to be a part of this traffic stop, but since he's clueless about why the stop occurred in the first place, he just sounds awkward and irrelevant to the conversation. I suspect what we have here is a bitter little incel, watching life from the outside, but desperately wanting to be on the inside. He's such a simpleton that it's sad. I'll bet he still thinks his uncle knows how to pull a quarter out of his ear.
It's still prior restraint. Take it easy. Fuck you.
And the sad lonely loser gets left behind by the cool kids. I'll bet that's the story of this frauditor's life. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, thanks for watching.